Australians are this morning being warned we could be at war with China within the next 3 years. Nine Federal Politics reporter Rhys D'Alessandro has the details. Rhys, it's a pretty dire prediction.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And it's dire, all right. Seems World War III is on the way. Because there it was, screaming out of the front page of The Age and Sydney Morning Herald on Tuesday in the first of an alarming three-part series. With the two papers chorusing,
Australia faces the real prospect of a war with China within 3 years that could involve a direct attack on our mainland.
That warning of imminent attack came with a comic book sketch of jets flying out of red China to bomb Australia. So, who was sounding the air raid alarm? A panel of 5 science and security experts assembled by the Nine papers and by international editor Peter Hartcher, who is a well-known China hawk, and featuring Peter Jennings, who's made a habit of predicting that conflict with China is coming. Jennings told readers,
"It really is all about China, China, China."
And he added,
"This is not about 10 to 20 years. It's really 3 years."
There was no contrary view and no shading of the possibilities. And the official sounding communique from the expert panel warning of war over Taiwan was just as definitive.
We believe Australia faces the prospect of armed conflict in the Indo-Pacific within 3 years. The most serious risk is a Chinese attack on Taiwan that sparks a conflict with the US and other democracies, including Australia.
All in all, it was extraordinary stuff, and it was instantly slammed by Paul Keating as
the most egregious and provocative news presentation of any newspaper I have witnessed in over 50 years of active public life.
With the former PM and China Dove adding,
the extent of the bias and news abuse is, I believe, unparalleled in modern Australian journalism.
Paul Keating has always been good for a killer turn of phrase, but on the Today Show, Nine's Chris O'Keefe went in just as fast and almost as hard.
But the reporting this morning is hysterical. Now, if you've got the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, who are the ones saying, oh, well, we could be going to war in 3 years, well, they're funded by the Australian Defence Force, Lockheed Martin, Thales and Boeing.
On Twitter, rival defence and China experts also lined up to give the claims a kicking, with Professor Nick Bisley from La Trobe University tweeting,
"It's irresponsible journalism, hyperbolic scholarship, and the 3-year timeline at odds with any serious analysis of PRC interests, capabilities and incentives."
And Tom Corbin from the US Studies Centre was keen to point out schoolboy errors in this graphic of how the warring sides line up.
This is simply inaccurate. The Philippines is a US treaty ally. Singapore is not. Guam and Diego Garcia are territories, not allies.
And how did the Nine papers make those mistakes? Seems they pinched the map from this German 2018 article on mounting tension in Asia, but added the errors themselves. Whoops. So, do all defence and China experts think China will invade Taiwan within 3 years and war is inevitable? Certainly not. The ANU's Professor John Blaxland told 2GB Drive,
"No, I don't. And that's because there's too much to lose. And it's also not China's MO.
And plenty of other strategic experts, including US spy chief Avril Haines, agree that China is a threat, but they don't believe it wants war over Taiwan. And as for it coming within 3 years, Macquarie University's Adam Lockyer told Media Watch,
Is this possible? Sure. Likely, no. If war came soon, it would be by accident rather than design. We need to be careful not to become hysterically fixated with low likelihood, worst-case scenarios.
So, maybe those views got a look in on day 2 of Red Alert, when the Herald and Age followed up with this.
How a conflict over Taiwan could swiftly reach our shores.
But no. Instead, we got more alarming predictions from Jennings.
Within 72 hours of a conflict breaking out over Taiwan, Chinese missile bombardments and devastating cyber attacks on Australia would begin. For the first time since World War II, the mainland would be under attack.
So who is Jennings? He's a former defence official in Canberra who for a decade ran the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, or ASPI, which is funded by the Department of Defence, the US State Department and a bevy of international arms suppliers. And he's long been crying wolf on China, as Sky's Andrew Clennell was quick to point out.
We awoke this morning to warnings in the Nine newspapers that we're about to be invaded by China. Well, the trouble is one of the experts quoted said 3 years ago there would be a war in 6 months.
Can this lead to war? Well, I think there are a couple of flashpoints in the region in the South China Sea and Taiwan, which give rise to serious concerns about the prospect for military conflict in months, right? Not years, but in months.
Jennings also told the Nine Papers confidently last year, amid concerns about a security deal between China and the Solomon Islands, that Chinese ships and aircraft were likely to arrive in the Solomons within weeks because the deal would absolutely lead to a military base. So, when Nine picked Jennings for the panel, they knew what they were getting. And they did not pick anyone who disagreed. As Dr. Brett Stratting, director of La Trobe Asia, told MediaWatch,
It's a shame the journalists didn't bother to seek out comment from experts with deep knowledge of either China or Taiwan. While the experts cover off different fields of knowledge, they are all running the same basic line about the threat China poses to Australia.
And foreign relations expert Professor James Curran told Sky, while we certainly should be worried about China's sabre-rattling, the panel's conclusions were scaremongering.
What does this group of experts know that most of the Western intelligence community does not? As I say, it is, of course, prudent to prepare for the worst, but we're having this kind of talk of Armageddon with all the visual imagery from the late 19th century that frankly makes some of the Cold War imagery look rather quaint.
Day 3 of Nine's Red Alert focused on what Australia should do to prepare for war, with the panel suggesting we double our defence spending from $40 to $80 billion a year, consider hosting US nuclear missiles on Australian soil, and bring back conscription. Cue another chorus of disdain from assorted experts, including the ANU's Associate Professor Matthew Sussex.
China hobbyist and war enthusiast Peter Harcher brings his Red Peril comic strip to a thrilling denouement, suggesting Australia brings back conscription and/or hosts nukes.
Sussex told MediaWatch,
Fortunately, a side government working hard on defence and security strategies that give us the capability to prevent wars, not assume they're inevitable. It's a shame Harcher didn't think to include their voices.
So, what did Harcher and Nine have to say in the face of all this criticism? Essentially, that the risk of war is real, and it's a conversation we absolutely need to have. Or as the Herald editorial put it,
in publishing the Red Alert series, the Herald believes that discussing Australia's preparedness or lack of preparedness for war is responsible journalism and important for democracy.
Well, of course, it is responsible to discuss the threat of war with China. But was it discussed responsibly? Many experts on China and defence clearly believe it was not. And that is putting it mildly.